Okay, so for first of all, I'm going to entitle this polygons. But then whenever we do the Roman numerals, number 1, the first Roman numeral would be a triangle. And then number 2 is polygon. I know whoa, what is it? Quadrilateral. Okay. Now, with that, what's the first quadrilateral? Okay, parallelogram. But did we ever define quadrilateral? No. You want to write down a definition for quadrilateral. What's the easiest definition for a quadrilateral? What does a quadrilateral have to be first? It has to be a polygon. And what's the definition of a polygon? Anybody remember? Okay, simple closed figure made of segments or segments and angles, right? Okay, so if a quadrilateral has to be a polygon, but it can only have 4 sides, why don't you just call it a 4-sided polygon? That's the most complete definition for a quadrilateral, is a 4-sided polygon. Okay, so what's the first division of a quadrilateral? I would write the definition of quadrilateral somewhere on your blue sheet, because it's not defined there. But yeah, I would put it somewhere on your blue sheet if I were you. No, it's not a term, because what do the boxes say? Name the 7 what? Specific types of quadrilaterals. So you got to define quadrilateral first, and now we're getting into the 7 specific types of quadrilaterals. Okay, so what's the first one? Parallelogram. Now, do you think parallelogram is going to go in the top of your boxes? Why? Look at the look at the bold outline around the drawing, right? You see the bold outline around the drawing? Okay. So the first 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, those are all in the same box. And then the next one has a 2. So what do you think is going to go in the next 2 down here? Trapezoid and isosceles trapezoid, and then the kite's going to go down here at the bottom. Okay. So definition of a parallelogram. What does a parallelogram have to be first before it can ever be a parallelogram? Has to be a quadrilateral, right? So you have to have that word somewhere in your definition. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, we're defining now the 7 terms for a quadrilateral. Okay. So a parallelogram has to be a quadrilateral with both pair of opposite sides. Now, what's special about the word parallelogram? What word do you have in it? Parallel. So you probably want that word somewhere in your definition. A quadrilateral with both pair of opposite sides, what? Parallel. Ta-da! That's the most complete definition for a parallelogram. So for a parallelogram, what are the words that are really hugely important? It had to be a what first? Quadrilateral. Quadrilateral, both pair of opposite sides, and so you have to include the words parallel. And then I'm obviously looking for the words both pair of. By the way, in math, you can abbreviate both pair of, in my class, BPO. Now please don't get BPO confused with, the O does not mean the opposite. What does the O mean? Of. So you can say both pair of opposite sides parallel. So what's the next division? Well, yeah, you actually have a rectangle, right? That's the next one, rectangle. Oh, that's cool. It underlined the word for me. So the definition of a rectangle, what does a rectangle have to be before it can ever be a rectangle? Okay, you could either call it a quadrilateral or you could call it a what? A parallelogram. That you can slide on. You either want it to be a quadrilateral or you have to call it a parallelogram. One or the other. It is a parallelogram with, now, this thing right here, it actually goes into the Egyptian word erect, which means to stand erect, like a building. You erect a monument for someone, right? Okay? And so whenever you do that, that means it's standing straight up. And in math, what does straight up mean? An angle what? 90-degree angle, which is called a what? Right angle, which is a rectangle. So therefore, a parallelogram with four what? Right angles. So this word rectangle, it has to have four right angles. Now, what else did we have to call it? A parallelogram. What could we have called it? A quadrilateral. So it's either a quadrilateral or a parallelogram, but it's one of the two. You don't want to call it a polygon with four right angles, because a polygon could be a pentagon, hexagon, heptagon. All these other things could have four right angles. So you want to condense it a little bit more. Okay, what's the next one after rectangle? Rhombus. Now, what does it have to be first? Good. Either a quadrilateral or a parallelogram, one or the other. Now, this is where we get into the difference of what you've known versus what you thought that you knew. Now, if I do that right there, what does that look like? It looks like a square, hopefully to you. I don't know about over here. Okay? If I do all four of those are all congruent, does that mean that it's a square? You would like to think so, right? But a square actually has to have four right angles at the same time. Because have I changed any given information if I just shove it over that way? I haven't actually changed any given information, because can't those still be congruent? Okay? So this is a picture of a rhombus. That's what a rhombus is. So what does a rhombus have to do? It's a parallelogram with what? Four congruent sides. So it has to be a parallelogram, and it also has to have four congruent sides. Okay. Now, before we go on to the third one, which will be a square, let's be sure that you got some sketches and some drawings for these. Okay? So the sketches and drawings would look a little bit like this. A parallelogram, you're going to sketch it based on definition. So based on definition, a parallelogram has to be what? A what? Quadrilateral. So you're going to draw something with four sides. What's special about those sides? The opposite ones are parallel. So the sketch of the definition of a parallelogram is usually some sort of, whoa, that was horrible. Okay, let's try again. Is usually some sort of rectangle that's kind of shoved over a little bit. And then you have to represent that the opposite sides are parallel. How do I do that? With arrows, right? Okay. But the left and right can't be going the same direction as the top and the bottom. So that's the sketch definition of a parallelogram. Because what does that represent? What do the arrows mean? That they are parallel, right? And you need both pair of opposite sides parallel. Is this one up top a good definition of a parallelogram? If I do that and I do that. No, why not? Yeah, because I don't know if the other two sides are parallel. Okay? So now let's look at a rectangle. What's a good sketched definition of a rectangle? What do I have to do first? A parallelogram? Or what did I say I could sub in for the word parallelogram? I could say quadrilateral. So I have to have a quadrilateral, and then what's special about that quadrilateral? Four right angles. So this is how I draw a quadrilateral with four right angles. That is the definition, if you will, of a rectangle. So then a rhombus, a parallelogram with four definition of a rhombus. Now, whenever I say that's the definition of a rhombus, that is the sketch definition of a rhombus. What about this? Is this good enough to be a rhombus right here? No, why not? All four sides have to be exactly congruent. So therefore, you can just put a double right there and you're good enough. Okay, so now let's go on back to the last one, which is after rhombus is going to be a square, right? Now, my program doesn't like for me to delineate between a square. So here's a weird thing. A square is simply the combination of rectangle and rhombus. So what do you want to call it first? Okay, parallelogram. So I would call it a parallelogram. What could you have called it? A quadrilateral. So a parallelogram with four right angles and what? Four congruent sides. And you have to have all of that in your definition of a square. A parallelogram with four right angles and four congruent sides. So if you were going to draw a square, back up. I can make better drawings than that. Okay, so far what have I drawn? Define what I've drawn so far. Just the quadrilateral, right? That's all I've drawn so far. I've drawn the quadrilateral. Now what have I drawn? Okay, I can't call it a rectangle. It's a rhombus. Okay. Once it's a rhombus, now let's draw this over here. Come on, come on. All those lines are supposed to meet. Sorry. Okay. So far, what have I drawn? Quadrilateral. Can I call it a rectangle? Yes or no? Somebody said yes, somebody said no. Why do you say no? Because there's not four right angles, there's only three. Okay, could anybody argue against that? Johnson. Good, why? Yeah, never forget that all four of them still have to add up to be how much? 360. So you would take the 90 plus the 90 plus the 90, subtract from 360, and what does it have to be? It has to be 90. So I can actually draw a rectangle by just drawing 3, because indirectly that means the fourth one will have to be a right angle. Okay? So is this a rectangle? Yes. Uh-oh. Watch. Everybody ready? Everybody ready? Are you seeing that shape right there? Are you seeing that shape right there? Is it still a rectangle? Is it? Is it a rectangle? Yeah, why? What makes a rectangle? It still has four right angles. Is this thing a rhombus? Yeah, why? Because it has four congruent sides. Four right angles, four congruent sides. So what else is it also? A square. Is this thing also a parallelogram? Is it? Is it a parallelogram? Yeah, it is a parallelogram. It's a parallelogram. Why? What does a rectangle have to be? It has to be a parallelogram. What does the rhombus have to be? A parallelogram. So is this thing a parallelogram? Yeah, it is. So there's your definitions for the first one.